Well, we are thankful for you joining us online this morning. If you're watching, whether it be on YouTube or Facebook or on the streaming platform, man, we are thankful. Welcome online. I'm so grateful that we get to meet online and that we get to worship together, that we get to open the Word together. And here's the reality. I don't know if you've thought about this or not, but today, as we're celebrating Easter together, there are hundreds of thousands of people, not just in the country, but around the world on this day, celebrating Easter together around the globe, celebrating the greatest day in history. And that 3 days after Jesus Christ was put into the grave, he walked out of that grave alive. He was not there anymore. He is risen from the dead. And we can gather together here. Even though it is online, we can still gather together and celebrate the goodness of Jesus together. And so with that, I just want to say welcome. Welcome online. We're thankful that you are joining us and tuning in online, no matter where you're at or how you are watching this. We are thankful for that. Thank you for continuing to engage with us. Thank you for continuing to support us, as Wayne was talking about. We're so thankful that you are connecting with us. I want to just give you a quick plug for what's coming up in the next couple weeks before we dive into what we're talking about this morning. Next week, we're going to begin about a 4-week series called Not Afraid, in which we are just going to embrace everything that's going on around us in our country and our world and really just handle it and talk about it from a biblical point of view. And so we're going to be looking at fear and at loneliness. We're going to be looking at anxiety. We're going to be looking at hope. And we're going to be looking at what Jesus wants to say to us in the midst of dealing with coronavirus around us. And we're living in a world that is pushing these things. We're living in a world that's pushing anxiety and fear and loneliness. And here's the reality, like maybe you're finding yourself dealing with that today. On Easter morning, you are finding yourself dealing with loneliness. You're dealing with anxiety. You're dealing with fear. You're afraid. Maybe you're in trouble. Maybe you find yourself today living without hope even. You just don't know what's going on around you. I think now more than ever, we are finding people around our country and around the world more willingly having conversations about who God is than possibly any time before. And I think now more than ever, people are pursuing spiritual truth, spiritual things because of what's taking place around the world and around our country. We are living in a time right now where people are afraid, where they're living in fear and they're seeking answers to that. They're wanting to know why this is happening. They want to know what relief there can be. They want to know where hope can be found. And so many people, honestly, are turning to find those answers in God. And it's interesting, like if you really think about it, when life is going good, when things are fine, when we're healthy, when we all have jobs, the economy's good, whatever the case may be, when things are good, when things are normal, we don't think necessarily about God too much. At least in general, we don't think about God too much. We tend to just live out our lives and almost feel like we're indestructible, like how we are living is just going to go on forever. But always something happens in our lives. Maybe somebody passes away. Maybe people start to get sick that you love. Life is turned upside down, whatever the case may be, and we start looking for answers in places that are bigger than ourselves. We start looking to places like God. And it's no secret, like I'm a follower of Jesus. I believe in God. I'm a follower of Him. And it seems like, when we talk about this with people, it seems like so often that when we talk about God, like there's not a overwhelming pushback from that. It's not super controversial right now. Like lots of people are talking about kind of higher powers. They're talking about deities. They're talking about God in some way. And maybe it's other gods. Maybe it's some sort of spirit. But they're open. People are open and willing to have a conversation about God and higher powers. It's not that big a deal. But here's kind of the kicker that I've noticed for several years even. When you start to say the name Jesus, the attitude changes a little bit. Maybe you've seen this. You bring up the name Jesus, and all of a sudden people start to put up their defenses a little bit, don't they? They start to push against a little bit. And here's the thing, I don't think it's a couple different things. I don't think it's because people don't believe that he existed. I think most rational thinking people will not argue that a man named Jesus existed in the first century. I don't think people tend to push against that. They generally agree that he existed. And I believe, not only that do they believe that he at least existed once, but they would also say that they don't disagree with most of what he talked about either. Like most people, most normal, moral people probably agree with most of what Jesus said. I mean, he talked about things like helping the poor and looking out for those who are overlooked and forgiving people. Like these are just some of the things that he talked about. And there's not a lot of debate for most people, even around the world, about that. There's no debate about the existence of Jesus. There's not a lot of debate about the teaching of Jesus. But here's the thing. Why I think people start putting up their defenses when the name Jesus starts getting said, I think it's this. I think it's the exclusivity of Jesus. I think it's the exclusivity of Jesus in a world that is inclusive, in a world that says that all roads lead to God, in a world where all beliefs are supposed to be equal, in a world where nobody is supposed to be left out, in a world where everybody just says that all religions are the same. Jesus is completely opposed to that mindset, and in fact, he speaks that out pretty boldly and clearly. And here's how it goes down in John chapter 14. In verse number 5, a disciple by the name of Thomas asked Jesus, where are you going? How do we know how to get to where you are going? And this is how Jesus replies in verse 6. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the way, Jesus says, the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. In a very pluralistic, inclusive world that we are living in right now, Jesus makes an overtly exclusive claim, and it's this: the road to God leads through Jesus. The road, in order to get to God, leads through Jesus. Here's what I want to do real quick for just a couple minutes. And, maybe it'll ruff some feathers. I don't know. You're not here to tell me, that you're upset by me doing this, so we're just going to keep going. But I want to look for just a couple moments here at a few other major religions around the world, just for a couple moments, and possibly recognize that maybe there are at least small elements that are positive, are good in them. But more importantly than that, I also want to just reveal that in fact they are very, very different from each other. And just for a couple moments, I want to look at other religions here together. And so let's just start with Buddhism, for instance. Buddhism believes that there is no God, there is no real final existence. There's this constant cycle of rebirths where one day, hopefully, the cycle ends. Like you die, you're rebirthed, you die, you're rebirthed, you die, you're rebirthed. And hopefully one day that ends. Or maybe we could look at Hinduism. They believe in a God that is, impersonal to you, like is not really interested in a personal relationship to you. And so, they believe in a God that if you want to get close to him, you have to go through other deities. You have to go through other gods. You have to go through other idols. And here's the commonality between Hinduism and Buddhism. There's no forgiveness of sins. There's no supernatural help. All there is karma, where basically, what goes around comes around. You get what you deserve. And so you have Buddhism, you have Hindu. Maybe we could look at Islam just for a moment here. They believe in a personal God. His name's Allah, with no secondary gods. There's no other idols. And here's the reality for Islam: how you stand, you're standing before Allah, their God, is based on your religious works. It's based on the things that you do in life or the things that you don't do, and your effort that you put forth towards following Allah. Or maybe we could look at the New Age movement, where they kind of believe that there is no one God, there's no real God, and you really want to just strive to become one with the universe. And so we could dive into these more, but but I think it paints the picture, especially when we put it up next to Christianity. As followers of Jesus, we believe in a personal God who loves people so much that he sent his son to earth to become like us. His name's Jesus. And Jesus came and he lived a sinless, perfect life. He died on the cross. They put him in a grave for 3 days. And what we're celebrating on Easter morning here is when Jesus walked out of that grave alive. And here's what we believe as believers. We believe that people, that us, we are made right before God, not by going through idols, not by going through other deities, not by performing certain acts or certain religious duties. We believe that we are made right before God when we put our faith in God's Son, Jesus. Like, this is what we believe. And we believe that we can only put our faith in Jesus alone. And here's the reality, like when you step back and you look at these religions kind of side by side, even just skimming them on the surface like what we've done for a couple minutes here, like when you put them side by side, we have to agree, right, that all religions are not the same. They're not the same, and they all don't lead to the same place. And so this morning, wherever you find yourself at and wherever you are at, I ask maybe that you would do something with me. Would you do this? Would you consider Jesus with me? Would you consider Jesus with me? Here's the thing. I don't know where your background is. I don't know what your upbringing is. I don't know what your theology is up until this point in life. But here's what I'm asking. I'm asking you to consider the man Jesus with me. I'm not asking you to consider our church, because our church will let you down. I'm not asking you to consider other believers that you know or have known, even around the world, because guess what? They're going to let you down too. Like, some of them are good, right? Like, some of them, yeah, you want to go hang out with that guy. But honestly, if we're being real, like, there are some believers, followers of Jesus, who are the most legalistic, judgmental, narrow-minded, hateful people ever, right? And here's the reality. We're not asking you to consider other believers because they're going to let you down. And I'm not even asking you to consider me. I'm not, because here's the reality. I will let you down too. I will disappoint you as well. I am not the perfect example, but what I want to do today, just for a little bit of time together, is, can we consider Jesus? Will you consider Jesus with me? Can we consider Jesus together? Can we look at him? Can we look at his life? Can we look at maybe some of the things that he did, some of the things that he said? Can we look at his resurrection? Can we look at what he talked about and just consider him for a moment? That's what we want to do for just a little bit of time this morning. And so I want to look at three main areas of Jesus. I want to look first at his ministry. Will you consider the ministry of Jesus? Consider the ministry of Jesus here. I mean, just think about it if you can. Who Jesus came for, and how he treated them as people, as individuals. This is the ministry of Jesus. And this is what Mark chapter 2 says. Starting in verse 16, he says, When the scribes of the Pharisees saw that he, meaning Jesus, was eating with sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? And when Jesus heard this, he told them, those who are well don't need a doctor, but the sick do need one. I didn't come to call the righteous, but the sinners. Let's consider the ministry of Jesus here just for a couple moments together. Consider the ministry of Jesus. Jesus didn't come for people who have it all together. He didn't come for the people who think that their lives are purpose. He came for people, honestly, like me, who are in need of help, who are in need of grace, who are in need of mercy in their lives. Jesus came for those people that religion rejected away from them. Jesus came for people who were told that they were not good enough, that they didn't talk the right way, that they didn't do the right things, that they weren't clean enough, that they weren't holy enough. These are the people that Jesus came for. This was the ministry of Jesus. And Jesus welcomed those people that were pushed away by other religious systems and by other people. He welcomed people that others despised. And here's the reality, he didn't come for the perfect. He didn't come for the people that were well. And here's the reality, if you think that you're perfect, you can just keep shining your halo like you have your life all together. That's fine. We'll move on to someone else. But here's the reality. Jesus came for people like me. He came for people like me who are broken. And if we look at the ministry of Jesus, there's another important element that we have to understand. We need to look at the things that he did as well. You know, he came for sinners, he came for the people that were lost, but he also did some pretty incredible things. And really what he did was he did some incredible miracles in his life. I mean, by the power of God, Jesus Christ, he did some amazing things. Jesus opened blind eyes. He healed deaf ears. He gave muted voices a voice to speak with. He multiplied 5 loaves and 2 fish into a meal that fed thousands of people. He cast out demons. He rose people who were dead. His very first miracle, he took water and turned it into wine. Like here's what you see. While Jesus is doing his ministry, while he's out doing this, you know, people were trying to convince others that Jesus was in fact not doing miracles around him. And here's the thing. They weren't arguing with the validity of the miracles. Like nobody could say, oh yeah, Jesus didn't do all those things. They weren't arguing with the validity of it. They just wanted him to stop. They wanted him to stop doing miracles. They wanted to find out where the power source was behind his miracles. And so, you know, they would ask, by what power is he doing this? Like, where is he getting his power? And nobody said that Jesus didn't do things like give sight to the blind or raise the dead. They just wanted to know how. They wanted to know how he was able to do these things. Consider the ministry of Jesus with me here. Because here's the reality, many of you, many of us are a direct result of the miracle of Jesus in our lives. Many of us are a direct result of a miracle. I mean, if we had time, we could interview person after person and follower after Jesus after follower who have been totally transformed in their lives because of what Jesus has done in their lives. Like they could tell a story of this is who I was and this is who I am now. This was the life that I was living and this is what God has done in my life. And I'm not that way anymore. I was a mess and I was transformed. I was addicted and now I'm free. I was full of hate and now I'm full of grace and love and hope. So many of us, so many of you, so many of us are different now because of the work that God has done in our lives. You are a direct result of a miracle that's taken place in your life, where the old is gone and the new has come. We have been transformed by the power of Jesus working in our lives. Consider the ministry of Jesus, but here's the second one. Will you consider the resurrection of Jesus with me? Consider the resurrection of Jesus. Well, why is this important? I'm glad you all asked. Jesus was miraculously conceived. He was born of a virgin, of a woman who wasn't married yet. He lived a perfect life. He did not sin. And on the cross that he went to, he took the weight of our sin, and he bore that weight. And while he was on that cross, he suffered horribly. And Jesus, as the creator, as part of the Trinity of God who created everything, was being mocked by the creation around him. People spat on him, they insulted him, they beat him over and over again. And Jesus on the cross cries out, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they do. This is grace. Man, you have to believe this. This is grace, where the Creator is offering grace to those who are mocking him. This is love from the cross. And then Jesus, while he's on that cross, at the end, he cries out, it is finished. Into your hands I commit my spirit. And he breathes out his last breath, and he dies on the cross for us. And in that moment, if you can imagine it, as Jesus is hanging on that cross, the earth becomes dark, the ground begins to tremble. A Roman soldier, not a follower of Jesus, a Roman soldier who's there watching all of this take place, and he sees what happens. He says this, I didn't believe, but I do believe now. Surely this was no ordinary man. Surely this was the Son of God. A Roman soldier who was not a follower of Jesus, after Jesus dies, says, surely this man was the Son of God. And Jesus predicted this. He predicted this in his life. He says, I will give up my life, and 3 days later I will rise from the dead. And 3 days later, when the women went to the grave, to the tomb, to tend to the body of Jesus there, they walk up to the grave and they see it open, the stone is rolled away, and they look inside and Jesus' body is not there anymore. He was alive. And this is what Acts chapter 3, verse 15, Peter, a follower of Jesus, says, you killed the source of life, whom God raised from the dead. We are all witnesses of this. Let's just look at this. He's talking to a group of people and he says, you killed the source of life. You killed Jesus. You took his life, but God raised him from the dead and we all saw it. You killed him, God raised him from the dead, and we all witnessed it. We all witnessed him being alive. This is what we are celebrating. Will you consider the resurrection with me? Will you consider the resurrection? This is why the apostles of Jesus were willing to give up their lives for Jesus, because they experienced it. They witnessed it. They saw it. They saw the power of the resurrection. And here's the reality for us as believers. Everything hinges on the resurrection. For us, everything hinges on Jesus walking out of that grave alive. And here's what some people will say. Two arguments. Some people will say, well, the Roman soldiers who were there that were guarding the grave, they stole the body away and he's still dead. Well, no, that doesn't even make sense. Like, they would have needed to produce a body to not be accused of that. And so that doesn't really make sense. Some other people will say, secondly, they would say, well, the disciples actually, defeated the Roman soldiers that were guarding it, and they actually stole the body and hid it away, acting like Jesus was alive. Well, let's just think about that for a minute. Like, we want to make the argument that some common, normal, untrained men overpowered, trained, armed Roman soldiers, and then took the body of Jesus, and the soldiers wouldn't say that? The soldiers wouldn't report that? No, that doesn't really make sense either. Here's what we see. After the resurrection, we begin to see a movement of believers over the course of years and decades and hundreds of years and now thousands of years, where people are looking and believing in the resurrection of Jesus, and momentum is found from that. And even immediately you have 10 of the remaining 11 disciples just passionately follow Jesus and start the church. Why? Because they saw it. Because they saw the resurrection. They witnessed Jesus alive after this. So many of those disciples went on to not only do great work around the area spreading the gospel, but so many of them died a martyr's death. You don't die for somebody who you stole their body out of a grave and were hiding it. You don't die for that. You die for a man who is God, who went to the cross, who walked out of the grave 3 days later alive and is in heaven. That's who you die for. I mean, think about Thomas. Think about the man Thomas. Thomas was such a doubter in his life. Like, he just had to question everything. He wanted to see, he wanted to touch, he wanted to know for sure. He needed to know more and more information and more certain, just so he could get it in his mind. And maybe you're like that. And maybe you're here and you're like, well, I don't know, I need more information. Well, let's maybe consider doubting Thomas here for just a second. After the resurrection, Thomas moved his way down into India. He was the first Christian evangelist in India. And this is how much he believed. Thomas went down there. He began spreading the gospel. They tried to get him to deny his faith. And he said, I will never deny the faith of the one who died and rose again for me. I will stand by him for the rest of my life. And at that moment, they drove a stake through his body for saying it, killing him. Consider the resurrection with me. Consider what happened in the following weeks and months and years after the resurrection. The church takes off and it starts, and you see multiple different times through the book of Acts, 3,000 people were added, 2,000 people were added, and so on and so on. And then looking 2,000 years later, where we are at right now, there have been millions of people saved around the world because of the empty tomb that we're celebrating today, because of the resurrection of Jesus. Everything hinges on the resurrection. Consider the resurrection with me. Consider the resurrection of Jesus. And finally, will you consider the eternal message of Jesus? Will you consider the eternal message of Jesus? This is what is said. Paul said this in Romans chapter 3, verse 22. He says, God's righteousness through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe, since there is no distinction. How are we made right with God? This is what it says. This is how we are made right with God. We are made right with God through faith in Jesus Christ. This is the eternal message that Jesus is talking about. Well, you consider that message with me this morning, because here's what it doesn't say. Paul doesn't say this. Jesus doesn't say this. Nobody says this. It does not say that we are made right by being good enough. And it doesn't say that we are made right by saying the right words. And it doesn't say that we are made right by not fighting with each other or not doing, different things that are wrong or different sins. That's not what it says. It says that we are made right by God by placing our faith in Jesus Christ. Will you consider the eternal message here? It doesn't matter what you have done. It doesn't matter what you have said. It doesn't matter where you have been. It doesn't matter how badly messed up you are. It doesn't matter who you have hurt. You are made right not by the things you do. You are made right because Jesus was perfect and He took the penalty and He paid the price, and He walked out of the grave alive. We are made right because of Jesus. And it boils down to this for me. If there is a God who claims to be the Son of God, and He says that He is the one way to the true God, the Father in heaven, and He predicts His death, and He predicts His resurrection, and it happens. And He rises again, and people are witness to it. I'm going to go with Him. I'm going to go with that man. I'm going to go with that guy. Like that God came for a guy like me. He came for a guy like me who's a sinner, who was kind of up to his own thing, who was far from God, who was lost, who was troubled. He came for a guy like me who needed grace and mercy and love in his life. And Jesus came for people like me, and He came for people like you who are lost, who are lonely, who are sick. And He died for us. He died for us. And looking at what God has done, the only reasonable thing I can do in response to God and all that He has done for me is this: take my whole life. In response to everything that God has done, this is the only response I can say: take my whole life, God. Take my whole life. Consider Jesus with me this morning. As best as we can this morning, we want to give you the opportunity to place your faith and your hope and your trust in Jesus. There is no special prayer. There is nothing overly, unique or special along those lines. It's simply us surrendering our lives to the Creator of the universe, who died on the cross for us and walked out of the grave 3 days later. It's us surrendering ourselves to Him. And right now, we want to give you the opportunity to do that. Take some time through this morning, consider what has been said, because here's what we believe. We believe when we place our faith in Jesus, it looks like us believing in who Jesus is and the things that He says. It looks like us confessing by our mouths that Jesus is Lord and we desire to follow Him. It looks like us repenting and turning away from our sin and towards Christ in our lives daily. It looks like us being baptized into Christ and into a community of believers around us. And it looks like us living our lives committed to following Jesus day after day. Listen, this process of surrendering our lives, this process is not meant to be done alone in our lives. As you are considering Jesus, would you allow us to consider Him with you? Like, would you allow us to walk through that process with you? We would be honored to pray with you, to talk with you, to study with you about who Jesus is and what your next steps are in that process. There is a link that's showing up here in the chat feed, where at whatever platform you are on. There is a link there that you can just jump on there and quickly fill out a form that says, hey, I'm interested in talking with somebody more about following Jesus. If you would just click on that and fill out that little bit of information, we will be in contact with you very, very soon. We want to walk through that with you. We want to consider Jesus with you together. Church, as we are celebrating Easter, as we are celebrating the resurrection of Jesus in so many different locations this morning, like here's the cool thing. North Christian Church has been one campus in one city, and now North Christian Church, along with thousands of other churches around the world, have become literally hundreds of thousands of campuses in individual people's homes, spanning cities and countries around the world. As we are celebrating this morning, let us not forget Jesus. Let us not forget to consider Jesus, consider his ministry, consider his resurrection. Let us not forget to consider his eternal message. Heavenly Father, thank you. We are so thankful for the opportunity that we get to celebrate Jesus this morning together. We are one group of believers that are meeting in so many different places, not just in this town, but around this country and this world. God, thank you. Thank you for technology that allows us to do this. And God, right now, I pray for each individual that is listening and watching this, that we would seriously consider your Son, Jesus. God, allow us to hear the words that you are saying. Allow our hearts to be open to you drawing us to you, God. And I pray that if there is some that are listening to this that have not taken that step of giving their lives to you, God, I pray that as they are considering Jesus, they would take that step, and that they would allow us to walk through that with them. God, we thank you for Jesus. Thank you for everything that he did on the cross for us. Thank you that we can find salvation through him, that we can find grace and love through him. Allow us to show that to other people around us. We thank you. It's in Jesus' name. Amen.